Hey, all, Ryan here. And I don't know why I keep on saying that because I don't think I'm ever going to have really anyone else taking these videos, but who knows? I could be proven wrong there. But here is what I think is going to be my last video of like technical video of the inside of the amp. Now, I've been doing a little bit of circuit stabilization, a little bit more research, and I found a few interesting things based on after sort of poking around a little bit more and researching more online. Um, One of the things I did, just this is just a pure enhancement, is that this it's marked 473K, but it's actually 0.047 microfarad. That is a pop suppression capacitor. So when you have the amp on normal operation and you turn it off, there was like this 8-bit video game crashing sort of noise. That's typical for any of the amps, tube amps and such. But that capacitor will help aid, and just it's more of a nice to have more than it needs to have. It doesn't need to be there. You can actually shut the amp straight off. Turning off standby is debated online as a thing that you don't really have to do. But moving on to the technical bits, you're going to see that there's this brown resistor and then this brown resistor. And what basically I started to notice was that this was a 3 watt 4.7K ohm resistor in this spot. This is a voltage dropping resistor. And it was getting really hot. So it looked exactly like this. It was a 3 watt 4.7K. Believe Koa Spear metal oxide. So I was looking online for different alternatives to get a resistor that was a little bit more power handling, especially in the first two positions because that's sort of recommended. I originally had the 3 watt over here for 1.8K. So I found these resistors on Mauser. They're pretty neat. The reason why I went with them is they were wire wound, so they're sort of low profile. Great for power circuits because there's no inductance or very little inductance with those types. Um, and they were really small. One feature that stood out was that they were rated up to 350 degrees Celsius. Now that's really close to basically my soldering iron temperature, which is roughly 662 degrees Fahrenheit. So they can handle quite a bit of heat. One of the things I noticed was also that they were, I believe, vitreous enamel coating versus silicon coating. Now, I do have a silicon coated one right here. So this is 5 watts, so they're both the same wattage. I'm going to very carefully show you the size difference. But you can see that it's much thicker. This is silicon. I forgot the exact other word, but this is silicon coated, and that's rated, I believe, up to, and here's the part number for it, 250 degrees Celsius. Here we go. For fun, I ordered a few different other sizes. This is 10 watt, and then this is 7 watt. So if we put them sort of all together, you can see the difference in size. Now, these are a little heavier. They basically, the heat is sort of maintained internally. It's not very good at dissipating heat, but that's not a bad thing. But they are a little heavy. So when we are sort of standing them up in free space with a bunch of, vibrations, if this is on a cabinet, that might not hold up. In the long run, maybe it will. I guess it depends. One thing, okay, so I installed them and I was very excited to know and to find out how hot they got. Well, it turns out it frickin' burned my finger pretty much, like upon first touch. And I'm like, well, crap, that's rated for, 350 degrees Celsius. Why is it getting so hot? Well, it turns out that these wire round resistors, these vitreous enamel coated, are meant to withstand that high heat. And that's okay. And I just have to get used to that. But these are extremely efficient at dissipating heat. That basically that coating will wick away the heat from that, sort of like a heat sink, and then it's meant to get hotter. So the resistance measured a little bit low, And then once this thing started cooking in a good way in this example, that resistor, did the appropriate voltage drop and everything, even for being a 5K or 5%. The same with this one. So it does get warm. I can hold my hand on it for the 5-second rule, so it's not too hot. This one is definitely too hot, but it's still maintaining the appropriate electrical characteristics. If I wanted to, because I feel like it's heating up that area too much, I would exchange it with this 5 watt, the silicon based. But I'm going to leave this one in here. It's super lightweight. Another thing you can do is actually take 2 of these, but have the resistance doubled. So the next standard version of this resistor is 10K. So if you do 2 10Ks, and you can put one on this side, one on that side, if you really wanted to, but I don't think you need to. This is all you need. All right, I'm talking way too much about this resistor and this one. So I swapped them out. Long story short, I swapped those 2 out. And those were the reasons why. All right, then I started looking around at the voltages. Here's the Japanese schematic. You might have heard me refer to it before. But here's the Japanese schematic. And I was sort of going through and, here's my original. So you see some corrections. Like this is actually 100K. And both of these were getting warm. And so I was kind of on a thing of a warm kick, and I very carefully was touching, followed all those electrical rules. And it was this resistor, this resistor, this resistor, and that resistor were getting warm. I had these Dale Precision resistors. They were not rated more than half watt, or 1 watt actually, commercial grade. So I swapped these out. They were getting warm. And I noticed on the real number 2, and it makes sense now, that those resistors were huge, all right? They were absolutely huge. I'm hopefully going to put a screenshot up now on how big those were. And it turns out that those were basically required. The way that these 2 tubes are conditioned or set up was that there's a lot of current coming through these, hence the warmth of the resistors. So Dumble upgraded them. I'm not quite sure of the type. I tried looking them up. It is identified here what type they are. It's this 100K DCM one, like those. I can't find them anywhere. They would have been too big for me to put on this circuit, especially reutilizing the same eyelets. So I went with the Coasphere. These are really nice resistors. They're sort of the same color as the original, so there's bonus points there maybe. And I put these are 3 watts. And they get warm, but they're not too warm, and they can handle the heat and dissipate 3 watts. So it's way more than what's going to be necessary here. All right, so one other correction was someone building an amp. I'm not quite sure if he wants to remain anonymous or not, but I'm going to assume that he wants to remain anonymous just for safety's sake. But I am giving that person a silent shout out. Is that this resistor back here, which is this 270K. We believe, because Steel String Singer number 1, the very clear shot of Steel String Singer number 1, that was 100K, and this is the local negative feedback for this part of the circuit. So what we're doing here is that we're reducing the amount of local negative feedback, which means I believe the reverb is going to be a little bit louder, a little bit more gain, or a little bit less gain with this. But that resistor, if it is 100 ohm or 100K, which it seems like based on the band, so I'm going to put a picture here, that's 100K, so that means more signals coming through, and that means less output, but more local negative feedback, so it's actually less. It's going to lessen the reverb. And that's okay. So that's just one thing we noticed here. Moving on over, I noticed that there was voltages on here, which is kind of cool. That the tech, when he was looking at Steel String Singer number 2, he was measuring some voltages, because I think that that's going to be the biggest mystery solver, and I'm so grateful that he put those voltages on there. because I bought a brown box so we can match the voltages. But why am I at 104 volts coming out of the brown box? So I manipulated the basically it's a, I wouldn't really call it a variac because it doesn't go above, but there's a transformer inside here that gets you the appropriate voltage. It's very cool, especially if you have vintage amps. But I don't believe I have it on this chart, but the incoming voltage to this amp was 102 volts when the tech in Japan, because they have much lower voltage, when he did a evaluation of this amp, he measured at 102 volts. So I got this little clever device, and it is able to get down to 104 volts. So now I'm going to switch over to my multimedia here and start measuring some voltages. So what I did is I'll kind of go to the short story here. I went to that pin, which is the incoming. If you look at the very, let's see if I can find one. At the top where it says B, 3 volts. Check this out. It's so close, almost 300 volts. That's a good thing. Well, then if you notice, it says 105 volts or 185. So I'm going to check the other side, and it measured a little bit too high. Like, what the heck? And then this side measured even higher at the time. So I was like, what is going on? But it was mismatched. So the thing that was bothering me the most about that was I figured I could change out this resistor and drop the voltage even more. That resistor right there was low, and this one was higher. So I was like, what the heck? Because, why did I say what the heck? Because the voltage measured here is the same as the voltage measured here. And that didn't make any sense to me. So I started tracing, and you're going to notice that that's 100 ohm right here. And this is 1K ohm. And this is the cathode resistor to ground, so it's going to pull some voltage to ground. And where is that resistor? It is right here. So I swapped out that resistor with 100 ohm, and it was still measuring. It was now measuring the same. So now we're at where I'm at right now, which is this side is, come on, did my ground fall out? My ground fell out. 1 second. Put that in. Now we're at 209 volts. And then going over here, and we're at 204. So it's definitely brought them into alignment. The difference now is basically because of the balanced triodes, I believe. They're just not balanced on that tube. I didn't buy the balanced ones, but it was still too high because we have the 300 coming in and then the 200 something coming out. Interestingly, so I moved on to the other side, and it looks like we should be about 187 volts on V2. So I'm going to measure V2. Ooh, here we are. And my ground fell out. Ugh. Alright, so we're a little bit high. So 187, and then I'm measuring 190. So that came in spec, and basically, long story short, again, everything came in spec. Everything came within a couple percent, except for V1 and actually the reverb tube. The reverb tube was, and I had the AT7 in, that was too low by like 20 volts. So I'm going to turn the camera off, swap this tube, and we're going to see what happens. So right now I have an a 12AX7 in the tube right now, and I'm going to change that out to a 5751 tube, and let's see if our voltages get close. All right, we swapped out the tube, and now it's a 5751 in V1. So we're expecting to hopefully get 185 volts now, or at least at this point in my life, I didn't know if changing the tube would change the voltage. So I just tried it, and let's see what we get. So remember, we're shooting for like 185. Well, check that out. We were at 210 before, and now we're at 189. And let's check this side. A little bit higher at 191. And I think that's all right because that might be just the tolerances or the actual tube itself. But remember that we're also 4 volts higher, or 2 volts higher on the incoming line. So we're really close now. And let's just double check. Our voltage is 189. Very cool. And this one, once I touch the appropriate spots, 192, we're definitely falling in line. And then remember, the other one was around 185 as well, or 187. Bang. We're like right there. So I did the same technique, poking around, and it turns out that reverb tube, at least as measured on the bench, I strongly believe that it's also a 5751 tube in this position, according to the voltage. So I did the same exact technique, changed the tube out, and my AT7 was too low, so I changed to a higher gain tube, and then the voltage was brought up. So I also, I think I showed on the screen last time, but I'll do it again here. I changed out a couple resistors on the bias circuit, so I was able to bias the FET appropriately. It is a little hot, so I barely crack open the thumb wheel, and it's the same level as my input. So it's basically unity gain. FET is the normal input. They're both about the same, using the exact same pedals going into it, and it's a little dark, but it does work, and I'm pretty excited about that. It's a lot darker than I expected for the FET. I believe what I've read online is folks say that the FET brightens things up, but I had the actual opposite effect, and it's not very bright at all. It could be because the wheel is almost not really cracked, so I'm going to try to maybe bias a little bit differently later on, but right now it works. I'm not going to mess around too much with that. But so ideally that wheel would be in the middle somewhere, at least for my sake. So yeah, a couple of changes that I made, and the amp. Oh, by the way, changing out that resistor, so the 100 ohm resistor from the 1K, what that does is it produces less local negative feedback in V1, okay? And what that's going to do is basically make the amp. Before, I had the amp, and I do have a load on, so yeah, I would have a very nice sweep. I had to go all the way up, and it would basically usable within my little studio space, if you call it that. It was pretty usable up the whole spectrum. Well, and that was with a bunch of local negative feedback. But what we're doing here is we're reducing the amount of local negative feedback, so it's a stronger output signal, okay, going into the next stage. So now, I'm not going to demonstrate it, but because everyone's sleeping upstairs, but if I go even as little as that, this amp is rocking the house. And for comparisons, okay, so I didn't know, how do I verify that 100 ohm, because clearly it says right here it's supposed to be 1K. Sneak preview is I picked up the Boss Tube amp expander load box, so I can put headphones on and not have to worry about that while my family is sleeping, which is my only time to work on this sort of stuff. One thing I did to verify that this is potentially the solution, or at least the correct value here of 100K, or sorry, 100 ohms, is that I built a John Mayer SIG clone. So this is a 2-rock clone, And I found a picture online, and I'm going to post it right now, where the gain and master is sort of like this, and the output volume is like this, and the gain is about right there. Took that setting exactly, and I made this exactly the setting, and I wanted to check if the volume going to the speakers was about the same as his volume stage. Now I know that he can mix and match, with the front of house. They can sort of balance the two amp volumes out, but I'm pretty confident that the stage volume was equal. So John was able to kind of figure out what his tone was going out to the audio mixer engineer. But sure enough, they were the exact same levels output. So I'm pretty confident. So this right there is about the same output as this here. So that sort of myth busted for me, about that 100K or that 1K was appropriate for the spot. It's not. I believe it's a 100 ohm from my tests. So actually testing this stuff. I think that's about it. I'm remaining this amp with fixed bias. This bias pot is in here for any sort of future endeavors, but I don't need to change that out right now. I have 35 milliamp current going through the power tubes, which is, some say, ideal for 6L6. I have the WGC tubes from Tube Amp Doctor. They're my favorite now. You can see the clear. They're basically the same as the GE 6L6s from back in the day, the coveted GL6s, or 6L6s GCs. Yeah, and I don't think there's anything else to mention here. For the phase pot, basically I put a lead on each side, so one here and one here, and I adjusted till the voltage drop was about 6.5 volts. That seems to be a good sweet spot for the amount of overtones you're hearing and all the rest. Going online, it seems like a lot of guys agree on the Amp Garage forum that 6.5 volts is a pretty good, if you don't have a scope or anything like that, that's a really good target to go for. It makes it easy for us that don't have scopes. Yeah. So this amp is rocking. I think I'm done tweaking it for now. I'm just ready to move on and build the head shell. So stay tuned for that. A lot of cool things coming. I'm basically using, contractors, DeWalt sort of off-the-shelf tools to build it. And excited to share all those little tips and tricks. So stay tuned and subscribe. And we're powering off.